And we are live. Hello, hello. Hope everyone is doing great today. And first of all, I want to thank everyone for actually joining this webinar. Considering this is the first ever webinar at Cyrex, I think it's safe to say that this has been an absolute success so far. We have over 700 people that signed up for this webinar. So I definitely want to give a big shout out to our marketing teams, our salespeople for effortlessly pushing out the message. And again, to you guys, each individually, thanks again for showing up. I'm definitely very happy to learn that there's so much interest in game security and game hacking, and that the awareness regarding this topic has really started to grow. So therefore, I'm very excited today to share our insights and hands-on experience when it comes to security in the gaming industry. Starting off a bit about myself, my name is Matt. I'm 27 years old. I'm based in Belgium. I'm a very passionate security engineer myself. I've been involved in game hacking and application security in general pretty much since I was, I think, about 14 or 15 years old. So pretty much since my childhood. I'm also the COO and co-founder of Cyrex. Cyrex is really a team that consists of incredibly talented security engineers that are highly specialized in application security, and this, of course, with a very strong focus on the gaming industry. I would say our core competences are reverse engineering, validation of server-side security controls. We're also doing a lot of source code reviews as part of our white box penetration testing. And then eventually, one of our unique specialities would be interception and tampering of custom network protocols. And this is something that is incredibly common, especially when you are dealing with online multiplayer games. Before we proceed, may I ask all of you to make sure that your video settings are configured to high detail. I believe on YouTube that is 720p. The reason, of course, is for the ultimate experience, and because we have custom-made in-house art during the presentation, so it would be a shame if things would look pixelated. All right, let's dive in and see what we have on the menu today. So as a first topic, we will be covering why people start hacking games, what their motives are, and why they might be targeting your game in particular. Then secondly, we will dive deep into how black hat hackers are infiltrating your systems and what methodologies and approaches that they are using to do so. Then as a third topic, we will talk about anti-cheat and the huge misconception in the gaming industry and why it is not a complete security solution. And then, of course, we will be explaining how we hack and secure games at Cyrex, and most importantly, how our approach differs from traditional game hacking. Then, as a fifth topic, we will explore our setup and how we hack games at Cyrex. And then finally, we will talk about packets, what they consist of, and how do we use them to our benefit in order to hack actual gameplay. At the end of the presentation, we're going to have a Q&A. So whenever you have any question during the presentation, please make sure to drop your comment in the chat, and we will make sure to address it at a later stage. Okay, perfect. First slide of the day. Why do people hack? Okay, perfect. So in this slide, what we're going to do here is we will be discussing the four most significant motives of why people are hacking games. And to give you a bit of background, at Cyrex, we are deeply involved in these so-called underground game hacking communities. And these communities are very focused on multiple levels of game hacking and cheating. And this really ranges from reverse engineering for aimbotting purposes to macroing and scripting for botting purposes, obviously, to actual exploitation of vulnerabilities. And we always say at Cyrex, be close to your friends, but be closer to your enemies. And that's exactly what we are doing here. Being part of these communities enables us to get insights of what is happening today, what is trending in the gaming industry when it comes to cheating and hacking. But most importantly, how is it done? With which methodologies and approaches are being used there? Now, starting off with our first motive, and this is going to be definitely going to be prestige. Many hackers, they will hack games to improve their own in-game status. They want to show off. They want to brag that they are the wealthiest in game, the most skilled, the strongest, the smartest. In essence, they are the best player in game. And of course, they want to do this without having to put in that level of effort and level of time investment that a traditional player would have to. So they're all about avoiding the grind. Now, these type of hackers, they always want to find ways to cheat the game for their own benefit. And I would say in the incentive in most cases is not really about causing harm to any players or to the publishers, but indirectly and potentially unconsciously, they are of course damaging the game's ecosystem and its business. And I think games that have high scores or where you have ranks or cosmetics or certain costumes or titles that really set you apart from other players, well, these type of games are going to be a perfect target for this type of group. Okay, perfect. Now going over to the second motive, and I think this one is the most straightforward one. Here we're talking about financial gains. And this group is most likely the biggest in terms of size. Whenever you are looking on the internet, you will most likely get a lot of hits when it comes to offerings such as aimbots or scripts or macros, or whenever you would look to buy certain items, virtual goods for your favorite game, well, then there's going to be such a huge offer in terms of in-game currency that you can buy, or virtual items such as weapons or armor. And any game that has an in-game economy where players can trade, well, this is going to be the perfect business case for these malicious actors. And the only thing that is really needed for these malicious actors is really to find a way how to generate large volumes of in-game wealth, which they then of course can sell off for real money. And in essence, there are multiple ways to generate in-game wealth. It could be from buying items for cheap from other players, and then selling them more expensively on their dedicated e-commerce platforms. It could be by setting up a bot farm where you have hundreds or thousands of accounts that are performing the same actions in game repeatedly, and again, where you generate gold. But the most profitable way in order to create or generate large volumes of wealth, well, that is going to be through exploitation of vulnerabilities. And I think the best example that I can give you today is, think about a flaw where a malicious actor would be able to duplicate items. This would give the actor an unlimited stock of items that he could just sell off, and he could even simply duplicate the items or the gold just on demand to remain stealthy. And this is actually a vulnerability that we have found a numerous amount of times, especially whenever we are dealing with MMORPG games. And I think it's safe to say that a vulnerability like this could definitely be labeled as critical in terms of severity, as its impact can truly be devastating for the business or for the players. Then moving on to our third motive, and I would say this is one of the most innocent group of hackers, because here we're talking about educational purposes. They are not here to make money on top of your game. They are not here to harm your players nor your business. They're really there to, I would say, sharpen their skill sets when it comes to game hacking and of course, hopefully, game security as well. So And I get it. I fully get that. I mean, games, they are a lot more challenging than any other classic application. And it gives such an adrenaline rush whenever you identify a vulnerability in game and you are able to successfully exploit that vulnerability. And I think one of the main reasons why this group of hackers will be targeting games is, well, because it is just a game, right? And there's a very different perception when it comes to hacking games versus hacking a banking application, for instance. But even though legally it would be treated very similar. So my personal advice would be here. If you decide to start penetrating a game and you find a vulnerability, then please make sure that you do a responsible disclosure to the gaming studio. And of course, do not tell anyone else about this vulnerability before it has been effectively patched. And who knows, you might even get a bounty from this. And I remember back in the days, together with my CTO and co-founder, Tim, this was something that we were actually doing very often. We even got enrolled into a private bug bounty program for one of our gaming partners. And we were finding so many vulnerabilities there, and we were getting a lot of bounties as well, up till the point that it was really not cost effective anymore. I mean, the partner that we were working with, they were paying us so many bounties that we had to transition to a different model, being penetration testing on a project basis. And then, of course, the last motive that we have for today, this is all about malicious intent. This is the most toxic group of hackers that exists, and they will pretty much do anything in their power to bring you down. So they are all about harming either your players or your business as a gaming studio directly. Now, these could be hacker collectives that want to make a statement. These could be individuals that conflicted with either your players or with the gaming studio in the past, and now they're simply here to take revenge. And look, there are plenty of reasons why they might be targeting your system, but obviously none of them approve their behavior. Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of why people are targeting games or why they are hacking games, let's see how they are doing it and what the most common approaches are. Perfect. So how do hackers break in? Let me take a sip real quick. Okay, so starting off, let's discuss the core components of a game regarding architecture and what the network communication looks like. So in this example, we will be discussing an online multiplayer PC game, assuming it is running on a Windows environment, even though that doesn't really matter. So as you can see on the visual, on the client side, we have on the left of the visual, we have the client side, and on the right, we have the server side. So the client side, this pretty much represents the computer environment of the player. This is on this environment, the player has the game executable installed, so the game itself. And he is pretty much in full control all over this piece of software and over his own device, obviously. Then on the right side, like I said before, there we have the server side. And this part is hopefully fully controlled by the game publisher, and no one else has access to it, because in that case, it would be a security issue, of course. And as you can see on the server side, there are two main services. At the top, you can see the backend services, and below you have the actual gameplay services. Now, in short, a backend service is, in most cases, responsible for any functionality that is not actual gameplay. So as an example, this could be functionality such as registration, authentication, matchmaking, inviting your friends to the lobby, or just purchasing an item in the shop. So in essence, any action that you as a player perform that is not considered gameplay, this is what the backend service is responsible for. Now, in order to communicate with the service, well, common interfaces such as APIs or WebSockets are used to really exchange data between the client side being the PC game and the server side being the backend service in this case. And I think most of you are familiar with APIs and WebSockets. These are very common communication protocols that are pretty much, well, they're very widely used in any other traditional application, ranging from web apps to mobile applications to even thick client applications. Okay, moving on to the gameplay service. And obviously, this service is responsible to handle all traffic that has a strong relation to the actual gameplay. So whenever you jump in game, you shoot, you move, you start a quest, you trade a player, or you simply kill an NPC, well, then a packet will be sent from the client side to the gameplay service. So again, here there will be a data exchange as well. Now, in contrast to the backend services, gameplay services, they use different communication protocols. And there we are mostly dealing with UDP or TCP. And the reason being, well, simply put, because an API or a WebSocket, for instance, it would not be able to handle large volumes of traffic. So as a developer, as a game developer, if you want to assure performance, well, then you have to simply rely on faster communication protocols. And there are multiple options here as a developer. Either you can go with the built-in technologies. Think about if you're developing your game in Unreal Engine, well, then you might consider Unreal Engine networking service. If you are developing your game in Unity, then there are networking engines such as Photon Bolt or Photon Pun. But of course, you can always develop your custom live service on top of your game. Okay, so now that we have a better understanding of how things work under the hood of a game, let's talk about how most of the traditional game hackers are hacking games. And this is super interesting because oddly enough, most of the hackers that are targeting games, they do not pay attention or they do not care at all about the communication protocols that we just highlighted. And their approach is very much focused or oriented on client-side modification. It's also known as modding. And I believe one of the reasons for that is, if we look back in the days, one of the first cheats, they were very much oriented on aimbotting or scripting or botting through macros. And that indeed requires client-side modification. But this really has nothing to do with hacking nor with vulnerability exploitation. But in any case, as I pointed out, most of the hackers, they are modifying the binary. They are modifying the game itself. And this they do through either reverse engineering or decompilation, very depending on what the programming language is used in order to develop the game. So if the game is developed in a high-level programming language such as Java or C#, well, then a hacker, he can simply decompile the binary. And from there, he can make changes to the classes, to the methods, to certain properties, essentially to the code itself. There he could change values from true to false, for instance. He could start tampering with movement properties. Pretty much he has full control. And once the changes are applied, well, then he simply compiles the binary again. He launches the game, and then he will see if the changes that he applied have any effect in the game. Now, in case the game is developed using a low-level programming language, well, then you cannot simply decompile the binary because of the low-level nature. And therefore, reverse engineering is going to be the desired approach. And here again, you can change functionality, but this time not on a code level, but on an assembly level, on an instruction set level. And I think it's safe to say that this is one of the toughest skills when it comes to client-side modification or debugging. But both approaches they are very tedious. I mean, they're incredibly research intensive. A lot of time has to be spent in order to either reverse engineer or decompile the binary. And this would never ever be the desired route to take if you want to conduct an actual professional penetration test. And like I mentioned before, this is because of the lack of speed, it's very slow, but also because you are not able to cover all functionality. It would take just way too much time. And this would, of course, imply that the quality assurance of your tests would be a lot lower if you would consider these two approaches. Now, additionally, there's one more thing that makes things even harder, and this is where anti-cheat comes into place. And most of you probably know anti-cheat and solutions such as anti-cheat or BattleEye. These are solutions that are wrapped around the binary itself. These solutions, they have client-side detection mechanisms to validate whether or not the player is tampering with the game. So whenever the solution would detect such behavior, well, either the game will crash mid-process or it simply won't start. And again, this will slow down the entire process of client-side modification because it makes it a less effective approach. Okay, so now that we know how, first of all, how a game works and which approach most hackers use to break into a game, let's have a look how we do things at Cyrex. As I think it's safe to say, there's quite a difference in terms of approach. But first, we will elaborate a bit more on anti-cheat solutions because there's quite a misconception in the gaming industry about this when it comes to security. So, anti-cheat is keeping us safe. This is something that we very, very often hear, especially whenever we are talking with prospects or leads. They feel like they are fully settled when it comes to security. And look, I fully get it. I mean, if you would have to believe these third-party vendors that are offering these kind of solutions, well, they claim that this is the ultimate security solution. So yeah, makes sense, right? And again, I'm not here today to break down anti-cheat solutions, not at all, because I definitely believe that they deserve a spot in the gaming industry when it comes to security. But let's get a couple of facts straight first. So first of all, anti-cheat is it's not a complete security solution. It is, I would say, any security that relies on the client side is simply security by obscurity, meaning it makes it harder for an actor to hack the game, but these client-side security controls, they can always be bypassed. And it's really just a matter of research and time investment. I mean, the more popular your game is, the higher the chance that either a community or an individual, they will get around your anti-cheat. And think about Fortnite. I think this is the best example that I can give you guys today. Everyone knows Fortnite, hopefully. Of course, it's an incredibly popular game that is getting a lot of traction, both from legitimate players, but unfortunately, a lot of hackers are interested in this game as well. And it has been proven that the anti-cheat used by Fortnite, it has been bypassed a numerous amount of times. And at this point, well, it's really just an endless cat and mouse game. Like every time hackers bypass the anti-cheat solution of Fortnite, well, the developers, they just push new updates, and the hackers, they need to start bypassing these new client-side implementations again. And there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, as long as the mechanisms rely on the client side, well, then they will eventually be bypassed. It's a 100% guarantee. Based on experience, whenever we at Cyrex, we are conducting penetration tests, there has never been a single case where we encountered an anti-cheat that we could not fully bypass it or fully get around it. So I think it's safe to say that this is not a solution. Well, that this is not the ultimate security solution. Then, secondly, imagine your game has 50 vulnerabilities. Well, an anti-cheat solution, it will not do anything against these vulnerabilities. It will not prevent anyone from exploiting these vulnerabilities or security flaws, nor will these vulnerabilities be magically resolved. So again, once the anti-cheat is bypassed, well, hackers, they will just have one big playground, and eventually they will exploit vulnerabilities that you have present in your game. So moral of the story here is anti-cheat is a very nice to have, as it makes things a lot more complex and a lot harder for a hacker. It's a very great additional layer that I would definitely recommend, but it is not as essential as a penetration test, because during a penetration test, here we will actually focus on the security maturity of your product. Here we will identify vulnerabilities and resolve vulnerabilities. And this is how we make your game more secure. All right. I hope all of this has been sorted out. And let's move on to the next slide. So, how do we hack games at Cyrex? And back to the initial visual that we've seen in the previous slide. So, as I pointed out earlier, most hackers in the gaming industry, they are not interested in the communication protocol. They very much focus on the game client itself. And yet, at Cyrex, well, we do the full opposite, because we are 100% confident that our approach is a lot faster, and it enables us to cover any functionality that you have in your game, and enables us to track down vulnerabilities at a way faster pace. So, therefore, what we've been doing the last couple of years is we've been developing an internal tool that goes by the name of Rex Protoceptor. It is a tool that is pretty much designed to intercept, sorry, that is pretty much designed to intercept any network protocol with the ultimate aim, of course, of a network payload modification. So we developed a tool that supports any popular networking engine, such as Unreal Engine networking service, or Unity Python, Unity Bolt. And in case we are dealing with a custom protocol, well, we simply have to adapt to that protocol. And this is something that we have done so many times in the past. I mean, especially whenever you're dealing with MMORPGs, especially in regions such as Asia, these games, they tend, or these developers, they tend to use custom engines and networking services. So again, there you will not deal with an Unreal Engine or a Unity. So here we have to adapt to it. Now, what is interesting about our tool is that it communicates both with the client side and the server side. And this we do through a man-in-the-middle attack. And look, the concept is very simple. If we want to intercept the traffic that is communicated between the game and the server side, well, then we simply have to be in the middle. So we can see both the requests that are sent from the PC game, and we can see the responses from the server side that are sent back to the client. So as you can see on this visual now, the traffic is now pointing to the Rex Protoceptor tool, to our man-in-the-middle tool. So in this way, we are in full control over the communication, and there's really nothing stopping us from tampering with either the API, the WebSockets, or the packets that are sent over the TCP UDP stream. And not even an anti-cheat can do anything about it, because we are well beyond that. I mean, we are not on the client itself, we are in the middle. So here we are pretty much rendering anti-cheat obsolete. Going to our next slide. Perfect. Yeah, so here we're gonna discuss, or here we're gonna talk about what our setup looks like. and how one can intercept any type of traffic. And from here, things will get quite technical, so please bear with me. I would say in general, there are four main steps to successfully intercept and tamper with network packets, with the first two steps being mandatory. And for the sake of this exercise, we are going to focus on interception and tampering of gameplay traffic and not APIs or WebSockets, because most of you are already familiar with this. And well, it's not challenging. So let's go over to the first step. So in the first step, what we're going to do here, analyze the communication. So here we will be analyzing the network traffic between the game and the server side. So there we use popular tools such as Wireshark, for instance, and these will give us, or these tools, they will give us insights about what IP address or domain name is used in order to communicate with the gameplay service or with the backend in general. It will show us what port the server side is listening on in order to receive requests. It will tell us what network protocol is used, which is of course super important for us to understand because we have to integrate with the correct protocol. And finally, it will also tell us whether or not the data being exchanged is encrypted or serialized. Then in step two, so having all the information of the first step, we now have plenty of details to configure our local DNS. And this is pretty much where we tell our computer that all the traffic that is coming from the server's IP has to be routed to our local host rather than to the game itself. And why to the local host? Well, because our Protoceptor, our man-in-the-middle attack tool, is listening there. Then, step three. Here we need to extract packet definitions. We need to understand what the packets that we are dealing with consist of. We want to understand how are they built, how are they crafted, what properties are there, and what do the values within these packets represent. And depending on the penetration testing package, we will either receive this type of documentation, especially during a white or a gray box penetration test, from the gaming studio itself. In case of a black box penetration test, well, then we need to extract it from the binary. And this is one of the few times that we need to return to the traditional approach of reverse engineering or decompilation. But there's a very big difference here because the focus here is very minimal. We are just looking for one thing in particular, which are, of course, the packet definitions, and we don't have to modify anything. We don't have to reverse engineer all the functionality within the binary. We are just simply looking for one thing in particular, and we will extract that data from the binary itself. So once we have these details, once we understand the format and how it works, we can now craft packets ourselves and can use this to our benefit, really to start reading and writing packets, which is of course pretty fundamental if you want to tamper with traffic. And then the final step, and this is something that you might need to consider. And again, the first two steps are always going to be mandatory. The last three and the fourth step, well, depending on the scenario. So what I was saying is you need to consider here whether or not the data or the packets are encrypted and or serialized. And most of you are familiar with encryption and why it's used. Obviously, it is used as a security measure to make sure that no one else other than yourself is able to read the network traffic. While serialization, on the other hand, it's pretty much used as a data compression mechanism, which is, of course, very much recommended whenever you would be dealing with large volumes of traffic in your game. So in case there is serialization or encryption, we will once again have to dive into the binary. We will have to look for the correct cryptographic algorithm and its key whenever we are dealing with encryption. And in case of serialization, well, there we simply need to find the correct functionalities, the correct methods that are responsible for both serialization and deserialization. Okay, so now that we pretty much have everything, we can really start hacking a game. I mean, we know how to communicate with the server side. We know how to read and write packets correctly. On top, we implemented the correct methods for both encryption and serialization. So here we are fully able to communicate directly with the server side, and we can start tampering with every packet really in order to validate the server side security controls and to identify vulnerabilities. Going over to the next slide, and this is going to be the final slide that is very technical. So just a heads up. So you're probably wondering, what do these packets look like that we are intercepting over a TCP or UDP stream? Because obviously we're not dealing here with a simple JSON format. Well, that's exactly what we're going to show in this slide. So as you already learned, the packets, they are sent as a stream of bytes, essentially, basically ones and zeros. And for the ease of comprehension, we will use a hexadecimal notation to really showcase the content of the packet. And again, I cannot stress enough, we only know how to read packets or to understand the format if we have the correct packet definitions for each functionality. And I remember back in the days, we had a very different approach in order to understand or to read out a packet. And what we were doing there was we were pretty much comparing multiple packets with each other, and there we would be looking for patterns and overlap, and then identify things that would be common and recurring to then really reverse engineer on that level and get a better understanding of what the content of these packets were. And yeah, maybe it's a valid approach, but I would definitely not recommend it because it was super research intensive. So on this slide, we are dealing with a legitimate movement packet. So whenever you're in game and you start moving, the client will start sending such a packet to the server side. And to keep things simple, let's assume there's no serialization or encryption on top of this packet. So in this case, we are really dealing with a raw packet. So as you can see, we are dealing here with a packet that is 14 bytes long. So if you would start reading from left to right, so we have 0E, 00, B5 up till 01. And let's dive into all the headers and payloads of the packet. So starting off with the first 2 bytes, this is the packet length. And indeed, if we would convert the hexadecimal value 0E00 to decimal notation, well, then indeed this would say 14 bytes. So seems pretty legit. Then the next byte, here we have a checksum. And this is something that is super common whenever you are dealing with packets that are part of your gameplay traffic. Pretty much every packet in every game is going to have a certain signature that is calculated using a certain hashing algorithm. Again, something that we need to consider and take into account whenever we want to craft packets correctly. Then the next 2 bytes, this is the opcode. And this is pretty much an identifier that points to the responsible function on the server side. Basically saying, hey, I am a movement packet, please treat me as such. And in this way, the server side code will handle the packet correctly. And again, opcodes, checksums, packet lengths, these are things that we pretty much in any game will encounter. Then the next 8 bytes, we have 4 bytes for X and 4 bytes for Y. Well, these are obviously the coordinates. This is where we tell the gameplay service where our player or our character is in the game. And then finally, we have one last byte. And this is simply a Boolean-based byte, true or false, saying whether the player is moving or not. And in this case, it is 1, so it is true. Now, the most interesting attack factor in this packet, well, it's obviously going to be the coordinates. I mean, there's not much else that we can tamper with. And imagine that if the server side would not be calculating the position of the player and he would fully rely on the client side calculation, well, then we could pretty much teleport to any location. And this can be, of course, be very beneficial. Think about accessing certain areas in game that normally would have certain level restrictions, or that zone is premium only. Well, now you can just access it by tampering with your movement packet. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. This is the flow that we use internally to test large size online multiplayer games and eventually test if the correct server side security controls are in place. Going to the next slide, here we just want to highlight one of the few projects that we have been working on throughout the years. We have been working with incredible partners in the gaming industry, where we worked on significant amounts of online multiplayer titles. And the genres are really varying from online first-person shooter games to MMORPGs to social community-based games to eventually games that are fed by user-generated content. And of course, we have been performing penetration testing on a multitude of devices, being it mobile, browser games, PC games, even console. We're doing Xbox One and PlayStation penetration testing as well, which was something that was pretty research intensive on our side, as we pretty much had to break open the PlayStation or the Xbox closed environment and find some zero-day vulnerabilities there in order to get access to the kernel and user landscape. Finally, what I definitely want to do here on this slide is I want to thank all of our partners for believing in us and putting their trust in our hands-on experience and expertise. It's really because of them that we are able to do what we are so passionate about, which is obviously game hacking. And words cannot express our gratitude. And we're really looking forward to expand on top of our existing portfolio in the near future. So once again, thank you all for believing in us and for giving us fantastic projects. And this is the final slide of today. Obviously, I could not share everything with you today. I think I would need a couple of weeks or months to tell you all about it. Therefore, we are definitely very eager to send over additional details regarding our penetration testing services in the gaming industry. We have plenty of anonymized security reports that are based on actual cases, on actual games that we can share with you. We have a fantastic portfolio that is highlighting collaborations between us and the gaming partners that we have, and most importantly, the value that we bring to the table there. And of course, next to that, we have our dedicated marketing team that has created loads of videos of what we do, what our focus is, and where we are heading in the near future. And to top things off, we of course have our weekly blogs that highlight specific topics each week, either regarding software development or application security in general. And lastly, of course, if you want to reach out to me, my email is here on this slide. Connect with me on LinkedIn. And if that doesn't work well, you can always send us an inquiry on our website. Okay, so this is the part where we have come through the Q&A. So let me revisit all the questions that we have. So one of the questions from Missing Nil is, the days of duping are long gone. Bots are easily detected these days. How do you handle market exploitation? Well, first of all, I don't think the days of duping are long gone. Like I mentioned before, item duplication is actually something that we still encounter a lot of times during a penetration testing of multiple games. It mostly is because of business logic flaws that you are able to duplicate items. So how do you detect this? Well, again, if you didn't write the business logic flaw, then it would simply not be there. So in essence, security, it has to be server authoritative. And this is a big misconception that we're seeing a lot, is that a lot of the logic is being written on the client side. And if there's one thing that we know, is that if it's on the client side, then the malicious actor or the player is in full control. So whenever you want to have a defensive system in place, then you need to have all your detection checks and validations on the server side and not on the client side. So I think that would be the best answer that I can give you for that. Spyros is asking, the anti-cheat software is on the client side or the server side? Well, I think that that's a very straightforward question or answer. It's obviously on the client side. Like I mentioned during the huge misconceptions about anti-cheat, the solutions are wrapped around the binary. So whenever a gaming studio ships their build, well, then the build is going to be shipped with the anti-cheat container that is around the build. So client side. Cyrex, I'm curious, what would you suggest? What you would suggest resource limited indie game studios to limit cheating? That's a very good question, and I fully understand it, because we're talking to a lot of indie developers, and yeah, security, it can be something that requires budget, and this is not always the case whenever you're talking to an indie game studio. In order to support the grassroots of our industry, at Cyrix, we have indie programs that have very significant discounts. So that is one way how we try to collaborate with the smaller studios as well. And I think security doesn't have to be expensive. It has to make sense. At Cyrix, we always focus on what functionality do you have, and based on what has to be covered, this is how we create our proposal. So we're not the type of company that says, yeah, let's go for a 10-day package and we'll see where we end up. I mean, that's total BS, and we like accuracy and transparency. So therefore, we take this approach. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me afterwards, and we can definitely discover this topic into more depth. Let me see, what else do we have? So Bruno is asking, Cyrix is using the proxy as a driver. No, no. So it is not a driver. It is nothing that is running on the kernel. It's something. It is pretty much a software that is running on user landscape, where we are performing a man-in-the-middle attack, telling our computer like, hey, whenever such a request from this IP is coming to our computer, make sure to forward it to our proxy. From there, we will be able to read out the traffic, we will be able to tamper with the traffic, and we will send it to the client or to the server side, depending on who we are communicating with. So whenever the client sends a movement packet to the server side, well, it will always go to our proxy first. Our proxy will either read it or we can tamper with it, and then we send it back to the server side. The server side will respond on the packet that we sent. There again, we will be able to read the response, and then we will forward it back to the client. So it's definitely not a driver. Sander van Dessel, what do you think about the Nuvo? It is really expensive and resource intensive while it gets hacked in a couple of weeks. Is the extra workload worth it? Yeah, it's pretty controversial topic because of we've seen bad performance, first of all, from these DRM solutions or anti-tamper solutions from the Nuvo. Look, it's a good solution. I mean, it's pretty strong in terms of client-side security. But yes, it is fully true. It has been bypassed a numerous amount of times. It will always be bypassed. So, like I mentioned before, this is always going to be an endless cat and mouse game. As long as you as a player are in control over the piece of software, being at the game, being in the anti-cheat solution, well, you will always get around it, given enough research and time investment. So I don't really have thoughts about it. All I can say is that it's not a security solution. Then from Simon, how long does such assessment typically take? I know it will vary a lot depending on the game, but just to get a rough idea. That's a very good question, and this is a question that we will always get whenever we're talking to leads or prospects. I would say based on hands-on experience, and yes, it very much depends on how much functionality you have in your game. We don't care about architecture. We don't care about programming language. We don't care about serialization, encryption. It doesn't matter to us. We have it covered. I would say 14 to 20 business days if we're dealing with an MMORPG. And that would represent, I need to think about that. But yeah, based on experience, most of our penetration tests, they take about 14 to 20 or 30 business days even, but it very much depends on the scope. I mean, we have done penetration tests on mobile games that only took us 5 days because there were maybe only 30 API endpoints in there. So that makes it a lot easier. Okay, what else do we have? Someone is asking, what are the most common vulnerabilities that you find during a penetration test? That's a very good question, and there are a lot of vulnerabilities. It ranges from remote code execution, buffer overflow vulnerabilities, access control flaws, session management flaws, or authentication flaws. But the main vulnerability that we will always find multiple times in a game, I would definitely say business logic flaws. And to explain it, I can give you an example. I think a couple of months ago, we were testing an MMORPG where you can obviously start a quest, you can progress in that quest, and eventually you can complete that quest. And upon completion, you will get a certain reward for completing the quest. Now, whenever you completed the request, a packet was sent to the server side telling the server like, "Hey, I completed this quest. Please give me my reward." And one of the flaw here was that if we sent that same packet again and we said, "Hey, we completed it again," well, we again got that same reward. So this business logic flaw it pretty much led to item duplication in this case. So yeah, business logic flaws are definitely super common. It's essentially, well, what should have happened is on the server side, there should have been a check validating whether or not the player has already completed that specific quest. That would be the right logic, but that part was missing. Therefore, it's a business logic flaw. What else do we have? And I'm not even sure how much time we still have left. What is the most severe vulnerability in a game? I think it's safe to say any vulnerability that allows you or enables you as a hacker to pretty much compromise the server side where you have all the intellectual property ranging from the source code to the database to the virtual machine itself and the internal network. I think these type of vulnerabilities are 100% most critical in terms of severity. And this could be through vulnerabilities such as remote code executions, which can be bidirectional. It can be either remote code execution on the client side where you execute code on the player's device, on anyone else computer environment, or on the actual virtual machine, which is server side. It could be through file upload vulnerabilities, where normally you would be able to upload an avatar, for instance, for your character. It's just a JPEG or image. But by bypassing the checks, you could upload shellcode, which will then be processed on the server side, enabling you to access internals of the virtual machine. What else do we have? Yeah, I think these are the two most severe one: file upload, remote code execution. SQL injection is, of course, a very severe one as well, but it's definitely not as common anymore because the frameworks have become a lot more mature, and they will definitely, well, hopefully, they will sanitize or mitigate these type of attack vectors. Okay, I think this is pretty much all the questions that we have, unless I'm missing something. So again, I want to thank everyone for showing up. I definitely hope you'll learn a thing or two today. And if you have any more questions, again, feel free to reach out to me, ask your questions, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'm definitely up for a chat. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, guys. Have a